I will have more news later. Time now for the world this week. It's the time for the world this week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The world this week in partnership with the Daily Beast. We say hello to foreign editor Christopher Dickey.
Pleasure to be here.
A busy week.
A busy week.
A busy week indeed as well for James McCauley, Paris correspondent for the Washington Post. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome as well to Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. Welcome back. Philippe,
Hello, François.
contributor to the French edition of the Huffington Post, Slate, and many others.
Yes.
As well with us, Hamdan Mostafavi, reporter for Courrier International, the neat magazine that brings you the best of the world's press.
In French.
In French every week. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, #WorldThisWeek. It was Monday morning, before dawn, the first of nearly 6,000 refugees and migrants boarding buses in a mostly orderly fashion as journalists from around the world came to Calais to witness the dismantling of the makeshift camp known as the Jungle. By Wednesday, the prefect, or state superintendent, if you will, had her mission accomplished moment.
Our mission is accomplished. We toured the camp this morning and there were no more migrants inside. As I'm speaking to you, we have already processed over 5,000 people who came through the registration centre. We will, of course, continue.
So, James, is it mission accomplished?
I think for the most part, it is, and it proceeded with very few of the violent scenes that we at least were expecting, that we saw earlier this year with the previous attempt to demolish part of the camp. But the really kind of heartbreaking element of the story does remain, and that is to do with the number of unaccompanied minors who remain in the camp. Now, there are fewer of those than there could have been. But for the time being, some that remain who wish to go to Britain but who have not yet been processed for entry into the UK have been taken to nearby schools and shelters, sort of waiting to see what will happen. And their fate remains as yet uncertain. So.
Yeah, because you were in Calais. There's a lot of finger pointing going on when it comes to these unaccompanied minors. We saw last week that they started to go through a dozen one day, maybe more than 100 another. Who's to blame for the fact that there are still all these unaccompanied minors?
I don't know. I mean, it's a kind of complicated gamble between the British and the French governments. The British government has they have two categories of children that they will take in. One are the Dublin children, the so-called Dublin children who have family in Britain and by existing EU law get access to come into the country. The other are called Dubs children, after Alf Dubs, the member of the House of Lords, and himself a kinder transport survivor who sponsored this amendment to bring in children
to avoid the Nazis in the 1930s.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So he was a child refugee himself in the late 1930s, before the Holocaust. And today, there is room for those children without family connections to come in. The problem, though, is that the Dubs children have not really been processed to the same degree and with the same speed as the others. And so last weekend, for instance, there was a transport of about 50 young women, I believe, that came into Britain, and there have been more since. But we just don't know how long it will take to process all of those who fall in that category, and it could be months.
James McCauley, we can perhaps show a photo that you or a colleague of yours that you took, that a colleague of yours posted on on Twitter. And tell us about this picture.
Yeah, so that picture, I mean, I think it's very important when we talk about what the jungle is, or what it was, to remember that for all of its squalor and for all of the despair inside, at the end, it had become a community of friends as well, and it was a makeshift city for all intents and purposes. It had infrastructure, it had roads, it had general stores, it had libraries, it had clinics, and for months, and in some cases for over a year. I mean, this is the only kind of home in Europe that these displaced migrants and refugees have known. So when it was destroyed, I mean, of course, everybody would wish to be in a better place, but it was also at the same time the only kind of sense of community that they'd been able to recreate in Europe. And so when you see these pictures, when you see it destroyed, what is destroyed is that sense of stability, or what little of it they could find. So when many of the migrants left this week, of course, they were pleased for the most part to go and sleep in a kind of a nice bed somewhere and elsewhere in France. Although, of course, they'd prefer to be in Britain, which is why they're in Calais in the first place. You get the sense that some of them left with bittersweet memories as well, kind of leaving behind the community that they'd found in Calais.
Hamdan Mostafavi, your reaction to the way things have gone?
It's kind of mixed feelings too, because of course it was not a place to leave these people. It's a place that is called the jungle because of it comes from the Persian name Jangal, which means the jungle, which was because the first migrants were from Afghanistan and Iran. Now, of course, it's more and more mixed communities that keep growing, but mixed feelings because what will happen next to the one who left, and also what is going to happen. I mean, migrants are still going to come to Calais. It's not going to end tomorrow. So what's the plan? What's the plan for the ones who are still coming?
It's not the first jungle, in fact, Philippe Moranchon.
No, it's not the first. And each time a new president comes and say that he will dismantle the jungle, but the jungle still reappears. And it's mixed feelings, yes, because you have it's kind of a short-term thing. It's only there for the elections that are to come, and then the next president will have to deal with the problem. And nobody really cares about having a real solution for those people. They don't even want to be in France. So we are really relocating them in small rural communities where they will be perceived at best as people that we should welcome and protect. But in many cases, they will be rejected, and it will create local political problems, maybe sustaining the growth of the Front National in these places. It's really playing with fire, and the actual president doesn't have the political strength to do these kind of things. It's really strange.
On that score, the regional affiliate of the French public television station France 3 has posted racist comments by Facebook users below the video of little under 500 refugees arriving in Toulouse from Calais. The article's headline, "Some of your comments are intolerable." And it's interesting because, the little forum bit underneath columns in all of the newspapers, Christopher Dickey. Here's the...
Well, actually, we don't have it on the Daily Beast anymore because there are too many abusive comments. And lots of the sites in the United States are getting rid of them.
In this case, the reporters took the time to answer the racist charges by these people, that they were bringing rapists, and I don't want to go into it because
but how do you answer that, Francois? You don't answer it. You can't. You're not going to convince the people who are posting those kinds of things, the trolls and the people with very ugly mindsets who are very racist and who basically hide behind their anonymity on these sites in order to say all kinds of things that probably they wouldn't even say in a bar. You can't really answer them, and the more you try to answer them, the more that you're feeding the trolls. So I think it's a real problem. But that's not the biggest problem we have here in France with immigrants. The biggest problem we have in France with immigrants is that people don't want to see their way of life changed by a massive influx of people from Africa, from the Middle East, and elsewhere, who many people feel don't have any kind of cultural affinity with them.
Toulouse, in this case, taking in 500 for a region that has 5.7 million people.
It should be okay, right?
Yeah, well, it should be okay. It should be okay, but these things become symbolic. I mean, look at what we have in the United States. Look at the way Donald Trump has capitalized on resentment of Mexicans, even though the Mexicans are helping prop up the American economy. It's just the way people react.
I think something is also worsening the problem is that I think French people feel it's not our problem because these people want actually to go to Britain. It's not as if they were asking for asylum in France. I think there's also a mixed reaction because of that, because even now that England has decided to get out of the EU, it's like, okay, it's their problem. Let them deal with it. So why should we It's not an excuse, it's just an explanation.
James Macaulay, on that point, are some changing their minds, saying, "But we don't want to go to Britain anymore. We want to stay here"?
I think some have, and more will when they consider more clearly kind of what the options are and frankly what the reality is. On the ground in Calais this week, it was clear. I mean, by virtue of the relatively kind of peaceful process by which most of the migrants left the camp, it was clear that many had, if not abandoned altogether the dream of going to Britain, at least sort of recognized that it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. And while they weren't necessarily pleased to be shipped somewhere else in France that they had never heard of, that they didn't want to be in, I think the reality was for many that this is certainly better than the status quo, and it may be something they grow to like with time. But I think ultimately Britain does remain the destination.
Look, the people, I've been watching this go on for such a long time. I went to Sangatte, 16 years ago, when people were living in the huge hangars that were used for the machinery that built the channel. And at that point, that was the problem. Sangatte was the problem, so they would close Sangatte. When they closed Sangatte, what happened? You had the first jungles developing, and then there will be new jungles because these people who are being relocated, they're not imprisoned where they're going. If they want to go to England, they're going to come back and try and get across some other place, if not through the channel, through some other avenue.
On that score, Philippe, your reaction to this surge, and I mean, everything's relative, right? When viewers watching us in places like Turkey and Lebanon might smile at this, but an increase in the number of migrants and refugees sleeping out on the streets here in the French capital since the start of this week.
Yes, we have. We have a whole camp in one place in Paris. It's the problem is the symbolic thing. It's not a problem of numbers because we don't have that many refugees anyway, and we are 66 million people. We should be able to handle a few thousand refugees, right? As you say, in Turkey they should laugh about it, and it would be just to laugh because it's not. Our reaction is kind of ridiculous. I mean, if you state that calmly, strongly. In a calm environment, you should say that. But the problem is we are in an election process, and the Front National is playing on that fire. And there are.
So what happens to a politician if a politician stands up to them and says no?
But nobody does because everybody thinks that's the losing end. They want to oppose the general trend, which is to bash the refugees, because this is not a trend. Now in France, we are very, very conservative trend.
All right. Contrast that, if you will, with the Italian prime minister. Italy, which has borne the brunt this year of those arriving from North Africa. Matteo Renzi naming and shaming EU members who refuse quotas of asylum seekers.
Se l'Ungheria, non per non fare nomi,
if Hungary or the Czech Republic or Slovakia preach to us about migrants and don't give us a hand, and then want our money, in 2017, when the discussion on the budget will start, the Italian right and left should come together and be alongside the government in saying, absolutely no way. We'll only put in our share of the money if the others stand by their obligations too.
Is that how you do it?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Why aren't French politicians doing that?
Because they're too afraid of what's happening in the country. They have lost the contact with their own citizens. Many people on the right, many MPs on the right will tell you that they are afraid of their own constituents. They are far more on the right than they are. I mean, they are the basis of the electorate, of the voters, are really on the right.
Christopher Dickey?
Well, look, the immigrants that we're talking about right now, they're just a lightning rod for the much bigger issue of racism and the much bigger issue of hostility to Islamic immigration. A lot of these people from Sudan, for instance, they're mostly Muslims. The people from Afghanistan, mostly Muslims. Mostly people who are symbolizing for a lot of the French electorate what is seen as a hostile wave of immigration. And we can talk about a few hundred or even a few thousand people here in France, but if you're actually talking about the Muslim population of France, you're talking about, some people say, close to 10% of the population. And they are being systematically vilified and systematically made the object of suspicion in a country that is increasingly nervous about everything from the economy to terrorism.
James Macaulay, on this, do you see a French politician who's able to echo words like those of Matteo Renzi?
Nothing so direct as that, but I think you're absolutely right about the sort of the way in which that this this proximate kind of Calais situation fits into this much bigger story of an invasion. You know, this idea touted by so many French intellectuals like Zemmour, Finkielkraut, many others, and then also normalized by the president of France himself, who has recently, and in the recent book,
not to mention the prime minister, yeah.
Right, and you know, saying France has a problem with Islam. This kind of this idea has now has some legitimacy to it, unfortunately. And actually, just this morning after Calais, I had followed one of the convoys of migrants to a tiny town just north of Montpellier, and there it was extremely clear that the majority of people in this small town of only 1,800, it's exactly as you say with the numbers, it's a town of 1,800 people. They initially were supposed to take in 87, but there was this kind of mass outrage. The mayor actually resigned, and now they've only had to take in 43. And they viewed the arrival of migrants, this bus that came down this small country road, as a real Muslim invasion of their community, of their way of life, in a sense. This kind of tightly knit, small, decidedly French community, in a way, at least French in a certain conception of the term. And it's amazing to see that, because again, the numbers are quite small, and you wonder what kind of impact this could possibly have on the community. Very small.
It's a symbolic impact. It's a symbolic
exactly.
impact. Yeah.
It's not material or real.
Also, I think it's important for American viewers to understand that this is not a country, no country in Europe would ever define itself as a nation of immigrants. The idea that you build a country through immigration is an idea that's essentially alien to every country in Europe, even those like France that have had large waves of immigration in the past. And so I think if you look at the American problems with immigration, you can multiply those 1,000-fold here. And if you go to a little town like the one you visited, you know, they really do see it as something that is wildly, literally alien to their way of life.
And the most interesting thing, I mean, that I heard when I was there was my chat with the mayor, who cited to me the wonderful example of the wall that Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, has proposed repeatedly building between the U.S. and Mexico. And his comment was, well, of course, because you can't take in everybody who wants to come. You need to have a wall. And it's this idea that, as you say, it just does not translate the same way.
Donald Trump, one of the issues we'll be broaching when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.